Welcome to another episode of the Meter Cute interviews here on Meter and Mayhem. Today, I'm sitting down with Lynnell Edwards, who serves as Associate Programs Director for the Sena Jeter Naslund Karen Mon Graduate School of Writing at Spalding University, where she's faculty in poetry as well as book reviews editor for Good River Review. She lives in Louisville, Kentucky, and is a poet, writer, teacher, and the author of many collections of poetry, including This Great Green Valley from Broadstone Books, which came out in 2020. Her book, The Bearable Slant of Light, which poet Maggie Smith has called both timely and timeless, is out this spring from Red Hen Press, and has poems that reach across the history of writers and artists who fought and sometimes lost their own battles against mental illness. Those poems are set against the urgencies of our anxious world and the intimate struggle of one family. Sound interesting? I think it does. So sit back, relax, and get ready to fall in love.
So I'm really excited to be sharing this work from my new book, The Bearable Slant of Light. I'm just starting to do a little bit of reading from it, so it's all really new for me as well. This book, in part, documents the onset of a serious mental illness in my younger adult son. And a lot of poems are about that. But it also reflects on depictions of mental illness in literature and history, as well as just our anxious culture. So I'm going to read the poem that opens the book. It functions as a kind of prelude, and it's called Medical History Number 2. There's a little epigraph here at the beginning. It's a bit of dialogue between myself and a doctor. And I say, me? I think there's a lot of trauma he has to process. Dr. K, did something happen? The hospital happened. The involuntary happened. The injectables happened. They had to rip his shirt. The doctors, the nurses, the residents, the techs happened. The other patients, some of them pacing in the hall and loud. The first attempt happened. The one-on-one happened. The EEG happened. The ambulance happened. None of this is in any kind of order, you understand. The restraints and psychosis, the overdoses and the non-compliance, the catatonia, the mania happened, the loneliness, the isolation happened, so many, many different meds. The assessments and telehealth happened, more ambulances happened, the courts happened, the ECT happened, the second attempt happened, the social workers happened, the intensive outpatients and treatment teams and therapists happened, 7 years happened, he won't get them back. So all of that, at various points is touched on in the book, including a middle section is about psych meds. And I'm going to read 3 short poems in a row from the section called A Bipolar Dozen. And it is head meds, A to Z, beginning with Abilify. So I'm going to read 3 here of these short poems that are really my response to what we saw meds happening and what we seemed to think was going on, and his response as well. Celexa. Hell no, he wouldn't take it again. He knew it wasn't right, felt it buzzing in his veins like a trapped fly, wouldn't take a pill that sounded like the name of a goddamn luxury sedan, smooth over winding mountain roads, silent into an inferno of fall colors, flaming in a distant state. Depakote. Might as well be called Dedicote, a dumb blunt of a drug dosed by the 500 milligram slug, thuggish old school knockout. Lithium. Created at the universe's brilliant birth, stardust salted over the fires in his brain to bring blessed equilibrium. It silted into his soul like lead, deadening, then aflame anew. So I mentioned that some of the poems document depictions of mental illness, madness in literature and history. And I thought this poem would be interesting to read because it's not particularly a case of a depiction of mental illness so much as it is a kind of pathological society, and what certain kinds of oppression do to people, and particularly in light of the recent death of Alexei Navalny. This was inspired by the book Darkness at Noon, which is a lightly fictionalized account of the Moscow show trials um, in the early part of the 20th century. The main character is a man named Rubashov, who's a party man until he's not. What the record shows: interrogation lights and grim weather. The sun, when it does shine, throbs pale and late above the prison yard, and the defectors shuffling mules around the millstone. Cigarettes are in short supply, and your tooth aches. 6.5 steps across and back the span of your black tiled cell. The barred window, a blessing, a scrap of paper, nub of charcoal, appears twice a week, and you consider a new thesis. Citizen, this is a mistake. You begin to think yourself a singularity, yourself a self with unique purpose and resistance. In the hall at night, foot drag of the damned and the herald of hands drumming against steel doors, eyes pressed against the peepholes. The sentence ends when the dull thud of history punctuates the base of the brain. Citizen, the record shows oppositional activity, conversation with known agitators, deviance from party assignment, and a brandy toast lifted in a firelit study. Citizen, here are the letters from your student. Here the ticket stub, the flyer, the confession. Citizen, what say you? To the ode tapped on a metal pipe with the rim of your spectacles, thin rhythm insistent as a bird pecking at a nerve, we have instructed no reply. Comrade, are you there? Friend, what news? And another poem I'd like to read is called Near You Not Touching. And this is a poem that kind of blends some contemporary language and imagery with the picture of Cordelia from King Lear. Cordelia is his youngest daughter who doesn't respond to him the way that he wants, and in the courses of tragedy. And it's called Near You Not Touching, with the epigraph from King Lear. What shall Cordelia speak? Love and be silent. From Act 1, Scene 1, King Lear. She wants no thing this day or ever, not money for gas, not breakfast nor her laundry folded, not the litany of my day, my purchases and tasks. She wants no comments on the weather, the grocery list, the war in France. She haunts the palace, imperious, pacing through the galleries, the tower walk, opening cabinets or idly clicking at her screen. Our shadows sometimes pass near enough to darken a slant of late daylight. She is mass enough for whisper, hands glance to shoulder, voice enough for greeting, ritual thanks. At night, she slips past my embrace, closes her door, and doesn't hear me howl, the keening grief of love on its knees. And then I'll end with a poem here that is more about our collective anxieties, and particularly those fraught by the internet. And this is called Security, a Q&A. And I'm sure many of you listening have been frustrated by numerous passwords, security questions, and the strangeness of security questions. And one day, I guess I just had it with the security questions. And this is the poem that results. Security, a Q&A. What was your favorite part-time job? What do you do to relax? What was the first musical instrument you learned to play? Everybody learned recorder in fourth grade. What is the name of one of your bridesmaids? That's getting a little personal, I think, and oddly specific. I had 4 bridesmaids. How do I choose? I have some security questions myself, like, am I in danger here? And how fast is the storm coming? And do we need to shelter in place? And what of the contagion? And if I show symptoms, is it too late? What of locks and bolts and shutters and bars? Security question number 1, have you established a successor? Security question number 2, are there enough PFDs on board for every passenger? Security question number 3, dried and canned is best for the long haul. That's not really a question, and I still have a lot of questions. Answer, please. What was the name of your first pet? Question, What are matches, potable water, reflection blankets, tinned peaches? Answer, please. What is the name of the city where your parents met? They weren't always happy, though it looked that way. And then the marriage dissolved. We were all okay in the end. Answer, please. What was the name of your first car? What if I forget the code? The alarm will go off at the server and security will come. Will they have guns? Will you? After 3 attempts, you will be locked out. That sounds bad. What if I can't remember? Why didn't you write it down? Thank you.
Well, Linnell, thank you for that amazing reading. I love
Thank you.
the mixture of um, there's empathy and there's humor, and there's also in some of your poems, especially with the repetition of like citizen or question, there's a jarring attention that kind of takes the reader and gets us, gets us standing up straight, and then you spread out into the poem. Um, I know that what I just said made sense to me, and it was a compliment. So I hope it made sense. I hope it makes sense outside my own head.
It does. There's a kind of relentlessness, I think, in some of the poems with that sort of repetition that um, I think provokes anxiety and is kind of meant to. Um, and so I appreciate that you did notice that, and it's a way to give the poem also some structure in what is otherwise kind of a composition on the page, free versy looking approach, but that it gives it some structure, some repetition, some pattern that doesn't seem to be otherwise apparent. So yeah, that made it satisfying for me too.
Um, so you mentioned free verse, but I'm going to ask you a question about what metrical poet are you in love with?
So Robert Frost never fails me. And there are a couple of reasons why. One, I did discover blank verse as a really good tool for me. And I used several poems with blank verse, narrative poems with blank verse in my third full length collection, Covet, because I found that it gives the narrative, it kind of elevates it out of what is otherwise sort of ordinary language. And it also works when you can't quite, when I'm not otherwise finding a reason for a line, blank verse is the reason. And it works very well, of course, as we know, with English, because as native English speakers, we tend to speak in iambs. And so it's easier than you think. When I've taught blank verse to students, I'm like, really, this is not as hard as you think it's going to be. You're going to find yourself just falling into it. And Robert Frost never fails. And I love his long poems. And so one of the reasons I like his work is because I think he problematizes the rural in ways that are really authentic. And I'm a person who comes from a rural place in central Kentucky. I live in Louisville, Kentucky now, so I'm a city dweller. But I grew up and am still often in the place where I grew up and where my father still lives. And I just feel like Robert Frost understands very clearly still what is at work there and how it is different than what probably many people imagine. And particularly, I think the long poems get at what that life is like. Of course, it's a life that's 100 years old, but in some ways, some of the same rhythms of the land and the lives there, some of the same values. And I think his putting those poems in blank verse puts them into a tradition of blank verse includes people like John Milton and Shakespeare, that says this is important in the same way that Paradise Lost is important. And so when I use blank verse, it's a way for me to say this is important. Not that every poem's not important, but for some kinds of things, it just works really well. And again, he never disappoints. He's got one or two that might be teensy bit sexist. We'll give him 100 years ago. So yes, Robert Frost for sure.
Do you remember when you first encountered Robert Frost?
I'm sure it was with what I think are not the best poems to introduce middle schoolers, early high schoolers too. I must have read The Road Not Taken, or Two Paths Diverge. I probably read Stopping by Snowy Woods. Um, and it was at the same point that probably in the poetry unit in eighth grade, everybody got dumped on you, and they always pick, I think, not very great representative poems because it's very hard to get your little eighth grade head around that, and they're not his most interesting work, I don't think. So I think that other more complex poems are interesting. And then poetry for me kind of went away for a while. I didn't start my life as a poet, and I didn't start my professional life as a poet. Um, but he was somebody I read when I started getting serious because I realized, I think there's something here. And I was right. I got a big book of a new edition of complete works of Robert Frost, and got to it. And it was very rewarding. Um, so, at two different points in my life, one in eighth grade with, The Road Not Taken, which again, you think about your eighth grade self and you just want to go, why does he make up his mind? Just go down the road, just get over it. And then coming back to him as an adult and a person with different perspectives, and also trying to understand my own rural life as well.
Hmm. Um, I had I had a question from something you said. So what is one of your favorite Frost poems?
I think the one that, well, two, I'm going to say two. One of them short, and this is the one I think they ought to introduce to like 14-year-olds. It's called Out, Out. And it has a very mysterious sort of epigraph, which is that short phrase, out, out, from Macbeth. And it's Lady Macbeth, and she's washing her hands and she's going, out, out, damn spot. No one really has any real sense of what that epigraph is supposed to mean. But the poem is a short narrative poem, and it's about a day where a boy, 14 or 15 years old, probably, working at his, doesn't catch his hand and it cuts it off. It is just remarkable in its also blank verse. And it's a really great poem to teach because you can teach the blank verse and you can say, and see, look at this line where the blank verse is all jumbled up and doesn't make sense. That's the line where the saw jumps off the chain. See how it goes together? And it's an incredibly dark poem and scary when you realize what's happening and the way it's depicted there in this rural community. And I think it scared pants off 14-year-old boys. And it would be, I mean, that's a poem that I taught. The other one I really, really like oh shoot, the one that has the line that's always misquoted, and it's about Death of a Hired Man. It's about Death of a Hired Man. That's the name of it, Death of the Hired Man. And it's where Warren, the guy who had been the tenant and the hired labor, shows up at the couple's door and says he'd like to come in, and he doesn't have any place to go. And there's that very famous line where, home is the place you can go, something like that. And it seems people quote it mistakenly, because I don't think it's a good line. I mean, I don't think it's meant to convey what people tend to think it conveys. And that poem for me is a favorite because I'm so acutely aware of the tenant landowner relationship, because there were tenants on the farm I was raised on. And it's a very difficult, dark kind of thing. And the poem's very difficult. And the hired man is someone who has lost his place in a modern world. And I just think it's a fantastic poem. That and Out, Out, I think, are fantastic.
Excellent. I will have to have to look those up again and check them
Yeah.
out. So what kind of you said you grew up on a farm. Um,
Mm-hmm.
were there crops or animals or what kind of?
There it was. Oh boy, I'm going to sound a little geeky farming. Like it was what's called a cow calf operation, which means that my father had a herd of mama cows, and the production was baby cows, which were then sold down the basically the production changed to a feedlot, and then et cetera. And so the crops that we had were to feed cattle, corn and hay, and then until the tobacco support program ran out in Kentucky in the 1990s, there was a tobacco base. So there was tobacco as well.
Is
And
the
that was not that was pretty typical for Central Kentucky. That was, Central Kentucky is not a huge, big crop production. We don't have the same kind of land that they do in Iowa and, Western Illinois and Missouri, where it's thousands and thousands and thousands of acres of soybeans. We just don't have that kind of land. So cattle, tobacco, hay and corn for feed.
did the farm has the farm stayed in the family, or is it off with?
It's still in the family, and I was actually down there this morning. My 86-year-old dad is now leasing the land to some folks who rented and themselves run cattle. So it's nice. We still have access to it, and it's still there, and we hope we'll stay in the family.
Nice. Did you ever think of going into farming yourself? You said that you didn't start out as a poet, but
Right, right. And I didn't start out as a farmer and wasn't ever going to be a farmer. I can see that leasing the land to people who enjoy and want to farm is the way to go. So, no, did not think about being a farmer for even a hot minute.
gotcha. If you could go back to your younger self, is there any advice that you would want to give your younger, not necessarily about farming or anything like that, but what kind of advice would you give your younger self?
Well, I think, that all of us grown women would probably go back to middle school self and say, hey, I know this is awful and there's no worse time than seventh grade, but all of that is going to be okay. I think I might have gone back to a younger version of myself in high school and also college and said, you're smarter than you think you are. I was always a good student. I hadn't taken study super seriously. And I didn't think of myself as an intellectual person. And I think I discounted myself. And then it turned out that I ended up in an intellectual career. So I think I might have gone back and said, hey, you're smarter than you think you are. You ought to trust that. So that might have been what I've said. I mean, other kinds of reassurances like you will find a boyfriend. Um, you know, uh, People won't be mean. You will learn to love your hair. All that kind of stuff. Of course, would go back, but I think I might have said, have a little more confidence in your intellect. So
Do you and you can, take this however you want, but do you remember the moment that you started to gain confidence in your intellect?
It was not until well into my PhD program. I sensed that, oh gosh, some really big stuff's coming together here. And I think I'm writing some interesting stuff. This was a dissertation work, and it felt to me like, oh, this is what smart people write. And it was kind of, I guess that's sort of a long time coming. I mean, it's easy to say our culture doesn't validate women for intellectual achievement. So I think there was always sort of that a little bit. Although by college, I think I was getting uh, you know, I was getting a little bit more confident and probably, was spoke more in class than I might have. But I think probably it was in graduate studies that I felt like, okay, I think I know something here.
Did you do your PhD in literature?
I did the rhetoric and composition program at University of Louisville, which was a great combination of lit studies and also cultural theory, and then composition studies and rhetoric, which was grounded in a lot of first year writing. And my first job, I did not think I was going to be a creative writer. Poetry came really late in the game. And I was, administrating first year writing program in a small university in Portland, Oregon, and was published a little bit of scholarship in that field and pedagogy, and would teach. I was kind of a utility player in an English department. I could teach first year writing. I could teach survey classes in literature. I could teach some creative writing, and didn't get serious about poetry writing till my late 30s.
So, if younger version of yourself somehow got in a time machine and
Right.
could see you now, see you, teaching graduate level creative writing classes and everything else you do in your life, got the sixth book coming out, like what would the younger version of yourself, what would she say, or what advice would she have for you?
Oh man. Um, I believe it or not, I think when I was younger, and now I'm thinking about to younger me, younger professional me, not seventh grade me or fifth grade me. I think younger professional me was less worried about my place professional on the professional landscape. And so I think she would say, first of all, would you quit worrying about which journal you're publishing in? And I think, and would you quit worrying that somebody else is doing better? That's a real, I think, problem for a lot of creative writers, kind of where I am, sort of mid-career, is a kind of anxiety about, are we doing enough of the things that are, recognized? Are we getting the recognition we need? Is somebody else doing better? It's not a zero sum game, right? And I think she would say, would you chill, but also, where's your energy? I mean, I look back at myself at like 35, and I had two small kids and was teaching a 4-4 load and running a writing center. And she's like, oh my God, how did she do that? How did she do that? So there might be a part of my 35-year-old self that would be appalled that I'm not, quite taking life at a full sprint. But I probably should forgive myself for that. There are always some things about taking life at a full sprint that mean you fall in a ditch or break your ankle. So,
Yes. I'm gonna sort of re-ask an earlier question, but with a
sure.
slightly different spin, um, because I'm kind of curious, because this book that's coming out, it has a lot about your son and mental health
Mm-hmm.
issues.
Yeah.
Is there any advice that you would want to go back to younger you and give about sort of like knowing what's coming down the pike in the future? Is there any advice that you would give her at that point about any of that?
Well, in terms of his medical history, there was no way to see this coming. And so there's nothing we could have done differently about any part of his life up until the age that he had a clear psychotic break that we could have done differently, because there was nothing about his life that suggested he was going to be anything other than wildly successful and happy. Um, and that's coming from sort of both a medical perspective, saying no, none of the things that you might see we saw. So I don't have that there's to tell myself, but an early clinician told us and this was before a bipolar diagnosis was clear and wasn't sure if any or what medicines would work or what was happening, to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And I didn't believe that we needed to prepare for the worst, either in terms of uh, oh approaches to getting support or help. Um, yeah. So I would say, oh no, you need to really keep hoping, and I keep hoping for the best, and things, I can't, yeah. We keep hoping for the best, and he's in many ways, doing all right. Um, Finished college, and is wonderful to be around. But I think I would have said, no, 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 you need to know this. And I didn't, I wasn't prepared or able to hear that. So,
So that sounds like something good to
yeah.
told her. Yeah.
Yeah,
My
and that would be something anybody. I mean, I hope to start some conversations around the country and certainly around where I live with the mental health community, with family support groups. Who, I mean, when I've read poems from this, there's always somebody in the audience that comes up and said, "Hey, thank you. My daughter is, my nephew is, my sister is." And they feel like some of what I'm saying in some of the poems resonates. So I do hope to have some conversations, and that would be advice I would tell them, someone who maybe is at an early stage here.
yeah. I mean, my father had when he was in like high school was institutionalized and sort of in and out of psych wards.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was the 60s, so they
Mm-hmm.
diagnosed him with schizophrenia, and then but now as an adult and much later it's bipolar with
Yeah.
psychotic episodes. So
Right.
it's all the changes, and so
Yeah.
I'm always let me I have to think of my phrase because I'm always excited when I see a book that brings mental health to the
Yeah.
forefront in the way that your work does, because you do have humor and empathy, but also um you don't pull punches, you don't look away.
Yeah.
And I think that
Right.
that's really it's a wonderful book, and I'm excited for other folks to get to read it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I am glad to have written it, and I've shared it with my son, and he's okay with it. He found parts of it funny too, and parts of it hard. And it was important to me also to represent kind of only mine and my husband's experience of this. I don't in any point try to imagine, you know, what this is like or what the experience would be like exactly. So this is what we see and experience. And I think there are again resonances in our larger culture too. I hope. And I began as I looked at American literature. So, there are things happening here that using these characters is an interesting way to talk about something. I don't want to be armchair diagnosing literary characters. I'm
Right.
not Freud. But there's a way to use these characters and what they're doing and saying, like Cordelia, and imagining her response to her father, King Lear, and what she's feeling, and using that persona and that character as a way to talk about it was an engaging and interesting project. To Quentin Compson, Holden Caulfield, Zelda Fitzgerald, all are folks whose literary or depictions of them in literature were an occasion to explore something.
How did you decide the balance between exploring with the poems that explore it in literature and
Mm-hmm.
those from your own life? Was that easy? Was the balance just sort of natural, or?
I think it kind of sifted out that way. Yeah, it was a very difficult book to organize. Usually you have a book, because some kind of structure starts to suggest itself. Oh, this, and I knew these poems would go together, but I did not have any sense of how I was going to organize this. And I spent a very long time shuffling things around. And it's in 4 sections, which feels really awkward to me, which is also good, because there was no narrative arc to this. Mental illness can be sort of a loss of narrative. it's not like the battle with cancer, that there's victories and small setbacks and ultimately a triumph and you won the struggle and etc. And there's not a obvious terminal easing into death here, which is also a kind of brave face, etc. It's just chaos, and without narrative. In that first poem I read, there's part of it, there's a line that says, none of this is in any order you understand. you know it's a chronic condition that is 100% unpredictable. And I think that for someone struggling with it, also there's that loss of narrative. I thought I was doing everything right. And then this happened, and we don't know why the medicines work or why they don't work, or why was this a good day? Why was the whole of April a disaster? You know, so it was a very hard book to organize, and I finally sorted things out in a way that I think works.
Well, I've since now I'm sort of devolving into asking questions for my own work and sort of picking your brain on because
Oh, sure.
I struggle to I've tried to write often about mental health in my family and have always struggled with that, like how to balance it, how to
Mm-hmm.
organize it. And so that's where that question is coming from. So that
Yeah.
tells me that we are probably near the end of
Uh,
of the interview. So thank you so much for coming and reading your poems and letting me chat with you today.
yeah, and anytime you want to talk about Robert Frost, I'm here. So thank you very much. And um, I'm looking again. It's been fun to do some of these early readings. It's great for me to see how the poems go, and the book is still really fresh for me, which is fantastic.
Wow, what a fun interview that was to do. I hope you had as much fun listening as I did conducting the interview. And if you've been around my channel a little, you know that mental health issues are pretty important to me. I talk about my own CPTSD on, in lots of videos. There's a period of about 2 months where I just like won't shut up about it. So find those videos. They're quite entertaining. Um, so so like I said, it's important to me, and I'm always excited when a new book comes out that is poetry and something so sometimes I don't have words, so formally intricate in some parts. Certainly there are parts that are free verse in her book, but there's a lot of very, very intricate work going on that I hope that you will check out her book. Um, her latest book, The Bearable Slant of the Light, and and see that for yourself. And I hope that you see what I see in the poems. But again, I'm always excited to see new books coming out because struggles with mental health issues and mental health in general, they aren't one size fits all, right? It's not you read one book and you go, ah, okay, I see it all now. Um, Everybody's experiences are different. And the more people talk about those experiences, the better chance there is for someone else who may be going through something similar to see it and to see themselves and feel seen, and for that to give them a little bit of an extra oomph as they go through their own experiences. Oomph, that's a technical term, but you didn't know that. Thanks for stopping by.